This video will present the various aspects of the integumentary system, particularly the skin and some of the accessories. This is a model of skin, okay, and starting from this outside layer, this is the epidermis, okay, and then this is the basement membrane. See the blue line? That's the basement membrane of the epidermis. And then the dermis is from here on down to the fat. The fat's the yellow stuff. So you can see how much thicker the dermis is than the epidermis. Okay. Now let's review the epidermis. Let me put this book in here because that model doesn't show all the different layers of the epidermis. But starting from the bottommost layer where there's a high mitotic activity, that would be the stratum basale. Lots of mitosis there. And then above that, the stratum spinosum, the stratum granulosum, then the stratum lucidum, and then finally the outer layer, the stratum corneum. So see, we have the stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and then finally stratum corneum. Okay. And now we have all those layers would be there. And then remember, the basement membrane is kind of like the glue. It holds the epidermis to the dermis. Now the dermis is basically made up of the papillary layer. That's this upper part. See, it's like little fingers going into the dermis, and then those little fingers are called dermal papillae. And now for a minute, you'll have to give me 1 minute to remember this, because yeah, the dermis now from here on down to the fat is made up of the papillary layer, which is just this topmost 1/5 of it, and then the other 4/5 of it down here is all called the reticular layer. See, whereas the epidermis is made up primarily of epidermal tissue. Well, not primarily, entirely. The dermis is made up of connective tissue, and it's made up primarily of connective tissue because you see other kinds of tissue in the dermis. Okay, then the fat on down, that's called the what? The hypodermis. A lot of fat down there. One thing I should point out, the epidermis with its 5 layers is avascular, but you see the dermis has got blood vessels. That's what you see, the red and the blue arteries and veins running all through it. Okay, and the hypodermis, that's where you find your subcutaneous fat, but the hypodermis is not part of skin. Okay, now you have a couple of glands in the skin, and what you see is this gland right here represented. That's a sweat gland. Okay, that's a sweat gland. And the other kinds of glands, see, here's a sweat gland. All the kind of orangish ones are sweat glands. Okay, and then you see right here, here is a hair shaft, hair follicle going down to the hair bulb. Okay, and you see this muscle right here. This muscle is an erector pili muscle. it can cause the angle at which the outer part of the hair, the shaft, is the angle at which it is to the surface of the skin. You've heard of your hair standing on end. That's the erector pili muscle, and it is made up of smooth muscle. This right here is a sebaceous gland. It's an oil gland. Okay, and so let's take a review then. Okay, this is the epidermis. How many layers in the epidermis? 5 layers. The stratum basale, then going up to the surface, the stratum spinosum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum lucidum, and then finally the stratum corneum on the surface. This blue is the basement membrane, which sticks this to the dermis, and then the lower part is the hypodermis, which is not part of skin. The dermis has the papillary layer. You see all the little fingers going up into it. That's a very, very small part. And then about 4/5 of it is reticular layer. Okay, the epidermis is epithelial tissue. The dermis is connective tissue with some other kinds of tissue in it. And of course the hypodermis, not part of skin, is basically a lot of fat and other kinds of tissues. The accessory organs that you can see here, you can see the sebaceous glands. They're the oil glands, always associated with the hair. And then the sweat glands. And here is the erector pili muscle, which can cause, it's a smooth muscle, and it can cause the angle of the hair to the skin, surface of the skin, to change. And then here is the hair follicle, and finally the hair bulb. Okay, so that should be a little bit about the integumentary system.